Hi everyone, I'm Alex, and you are listening to the Health Accomplice podcast. I'm on a health journey and learning so much about my mind, body, and spirituality, and I want to share that with all of you in the hopes that it benefits you as well so that we can live our healthiest and happiest lives. Welcome to the podcast. Hi everyone, it's been a little while since I've put out an episode because of everything else that needed more attention right now. It's a crazy time we're living in, and I'm sure we're all just doing our best to understand and learn everything that's happening right now, not only with COVID, but with the Black Lives Matter movement and what role we should play in it. I see my role as continuing the spread of information on how we can live a more healthier and balanced life. And I love that podcasts are free because I'm hoping this reaches as many people as it needs to make a difference in how we take care of ourselves and how we treat one another. So speaking of how we treat one another, relationships are a major part of health. Unhealthy relationships can take a toll on us both mentally and physically, which is why I wanted to bring one of my very best friends, Dr. Jessica Waldron, onto this podcast. She is a clinical psychologist who focuses on relationships, sexual health, and sleep medicine. She received her doctorate from Stanford, and much of her clinical training was also done at Stanford Psychiatry. She's such a badass because it doesn't stop there. She's also done a ton of research on women's health, chronic pain, mood, and anxiety disorders. She's also consulted with companies like Lover, which is a sexual wellness app. I really love her approach because it's grounded in evidence-based treatments, and she pays special attention to an individual's background, your unique history, and cultural factors. It's really a holistic approach, which you guys all know that I love. So I've known Jess for over 10 years now and continue to be so impressed by her. She's really kept me sane during this pandemic. She's one of the funniest people I've ever met, and it's pretty common for me to end up cry laughing whenever we talk, which is always good medicine. So in this episode, we discuss attachment theory, what it is, and how it can impact our relationships. We discuss the 4 attachment styles: secure attachment, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized, and discuss how to heal if one of the insecure attachment styles resonates with us. I've created a resource page on healthaccomplice.com where you can find the details of this episode and resources that we discuss in this episode as well. We tried to make this serious-ish topic as fun and enjoyable as possible, so I hope you like this episode. So let's get into it. So I would love for you to start out by going through your background and context so that everyone knows who you are and what the context is for our conversation about attachment theory.
Yes, so I am a clinical psychologist out of the San Francisco Bay Area with specialties in relationships, couples, and sex therapy.
That's a perfect intro. So one of the questions that I had, I actually can't believe I don't know this about you because we talk all the time, but what was your aha moment? Why did you even want to study psychology?
I studied psychology in college and I loved it and I was drawn towards it. I mean, I was always drawn towards understanding people and just how they got to like where they were. You know, so even as a kid, if we were in a restaurant, I could tell you all the stuff that was happening around me because I'd just be like so tuned in. Okay, they're in a fight over there, or you know, like that couple's fighting, or they're on a date or whatever. And so often people would call me like nosy or whatever, but I was always just like super curious about how people got to where they were and why they were with that person and where they got to, why they live here and why did they do that job, that type of stuff. And so I, did psychology in my undergrad, soaked it all up, loved it. But then when I was graduating, it was like the only 2 options were, go to grad school, get a higher degree, or like get into research. And I just wasn't quite ready to make that decision. I felt like I had like some more life and exploration to live. So that's when I moved to New York.
I remember that.
And I think I met you during that time, so many years ago. And then, I worked in fashion and did a couple other things. And then I was seeing a therapist and just kind of finding myself in New York City and kind of deciding, on like what I wanted my career to be. And he suggested just starting to do like an internship type thing, volunteer work up at Columbia in their psychiatry department. And so I got involved in some research there. And through that research, I got to kind of interface with some of the research participants who at the time were kind of adolescent young adults who had early signs of schizophrenia.
Okay.
And so it's called prodromal, and that was the research that it was. And so I got like a little bit of contact with the actual like research participants, and that just really solidified for me, oh, I like really want to be doing, be working with the patients one-on-one. And then from there it was just like figuring out the whole like grad school process and what degree to get and all that.
Yeah. And then you're such a smarty pants and you went to Stanford.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. Slipped through the cracks.
I love it. Okay. So attachment theory is one of the reasons why I wanted to learn more about it. And I'll be honest. So there's a lot of people that I've seen reading the book Attached, and it's been recommended to me by so many people. Mm-hmm. I read a few articles, but I haven't read the book yet. I'm fascinated with the concept as it applies to my own life, my own relationships. So I just wanted to get a good baseline understanding of let's start out by going through what is attachment theory.
Okay. Yeah, sure. This is definitely one of my favorite topics, especially in the work I do with couples, relationships, but also just really any individual kind of understanding their history and how they relate and connect to significant others in their life and how that's like showing up. I predominantly work with adults, so I don't work with this idea of attachment in kids, but it's something that we see across the lifespan and definitely impacts relationships. Mm-hmm. So attachment theory at its simplest form is really just talking about this emotion, this need. It's a survival need. We're biologically wired to emotionally bond or attach to one other person in our life. Mm-hmm. And it starts as soon as we're born. And it's basically, the understanding is that it's a survival thing, right? So if you're an infant and you're just born, and you literally can't fend for yourself, right? You can't get food for yourself. Like you can do nothing. You're like literally laying there. Your entire survival is dependent on that one other person, usually your primary caregiver, typically a mother, maybe a father, or maybe a nanny, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So it's in your interest is that to keep yourself as close to the survival person as possible, you want to emotionally bond to them. And, originally the research was kind of done with infants and parents, but it's come to be accepted that this need to connect or bond with at least one other person in our life is essential for healthy relationships, for our own healthy emotional regulation, for self-esteem, for confidence. It creates this, what they call like a secure base that we can sort of go out into the world and be individuals and do new things and feel comfortable with our emotional needs and wants and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. So there are so basically it starts in childhood, and what you experience as an infant and in childhood will have a big impact on how you behave in your relationships further down the road. Is that right?
Yeah, typically the attachment style, and we'll talk about attachment styles, the different types, but the attachment style that you develop in infancy it's pretty stable across your lifespan, right? And so that usually does show up in other significant relationships across your life. In adolescence, those years, typically, sometimes that tends to be maybe like your best friends. Yep. And then into early romantic relationships, and then into later romantic relationships, it starts to show up. So transfers, usually, you will still maintain likely the same type of attachment style with your parent. Yeah. But then you might see it showing up in just the way that you relate to other significant others in your life.
Okay. I have so many questions about this because, for people who didn't receive, like people who may not have received the proper care when they were an infant or had any bonding, maybe their caregivers weren't available, etc. I have so many questions, but maybe it's better for us to start with the different types of attachments. There's how many? 3?
There's 4 different styles. One is secure attachment, which is the ideal one. And then there's 3 insecure attachment styles.
Okay. What are they?
So they go sometimes by a couple different names, but there's one which is kind of anxious ambivalent attachment.
Mm-hmm.
So this is someone who, when they start to feel the threat of disconnection from that attachment other, they're going to protest they're going to experience a lot of anxiety. They're going to get super dysregulated. They're going to fight to have that person stay close. They really crave a high level of closeness.
Okay.
And they have a high level of anxiety about the security of the relationship.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is kind of like, you can imagine, maybe the frantic girlfriend or boyfriend who,
like a stage 5 anger.
Yeah, who you don't respond to their text message, and maybe it's been like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and then you were just maybe you were like chatting with a friend and you come back to your phone and you have like 20 missed calls.
Yeah.
The second style is avoidant attachment. And so this style is someone who has learned to suppress their needs and wants from the other person, right? So this person has likely, their parent was kind of disengaged or not very affectionate, not very available, maybe just, not very emotional, not hyper attuned to them, and kind of dismissed their needs. So over time, they just learned to suppress them, right? Well, okay, if I want to stay close to my parent, I just need to not have needs because this person's not going to meet them for me. And it's too painful to have needs and then not have them met. So you just like go offline with them.
That makes sense. So this is a parent that was emotionally unavailable when you were younger. Can we go back to anxious attachment? What does that look like in infancy? What causes anxious attachment?
The parent of a child that ends up with anxious attachment the parent tends to be inconsistent. Right? So sometimes they're attentive and warm and they want to, give you all this affection. But then when they're not in the mood, or they are having their own issue or whatever, they might push you away. Mm-hmm. Right? And so it's very confusing. And because the kid sometimes gets what they want from the parent, they're constantly fighting to get it. Right? Okay. Like I just have to keep like pulling for that because I'll get it at some point. Right? It's kind of like that. What is that, like kind of behavioral, like interval ratio reward type, where it's like, if I hit the thing enough times, I don't know how many times I have to hit it, but if I hit it enough times, eventually I'll get what I want. Right. So this parent, and so the parent's very much kind of using the kid like at their, this isn't necessarily happening, obviously consciously, the parent may not do that.
Yeah, this isn't no way to blame parents or anything.
No.
An understanding of behaviors.
Right. So, so they're kind of, they're using the kid when it feels good for them to kind of, when it feels good to have the kid around and to feel affection towards them, and then dismissing them when, maybe they're having their own thing or whatever. So.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. And so that causes anxious attachment style. Then the avoidant style, you mentioned this is somebody, usually a parent who is emotionally unavailable. And so you've learned, you've been conditioned to not express your emotions because you will not get them met.
Right. So you suppress them. So that person, like as an adult, I'm sure everyone has, not everyone, but I'm sure a lot of people have dated that person, or have a friend or have a colleague or someone who just is like, I'm good on my own. Like, I really don't need that. Like, I'm actually fine. I don't really need anybody. They kind of like scoff if you express emotional needs, like that's too much. They'll be a little bit invalidating to that. So it's not that they don't deep down have the same needs to connect with another person that we all are wired to, that's just deeply suppressed, depending on how severe, or if they didn't have any other experiences to counter maybe what they were receiving from one of their caregivers.
Got it. And what's the third insecure attachment style?
So the third one is disorganized. So this is kind of the most severe of the insecure attachment styles. It typically happens from a child who experienced some sort of trauma, emotional abuse, sexual, physical abuse, or they were like had a frightening parent, maybe there was a lot of anger or just aggression, things like that happening in the house, or if your mom was like severely depressed and so had like just a flat, you're not getting anything from them. That's really scary, right? To have a parent that's really just down and withdrawn. And this attachment style is really a chaotic feeling for a child and an adult, because you recognize that you do crave the intimacy. Mm-hmm. Whereas the avoidance style, they're like, I don't crave intimacy, like low need for intimacy and low anxiety about it. They like, I don't need it. But when you have this disorganized style, you recognize that you want it, but as soon as it comes towards you, the fear clicks in and then you push it away.
Yeah.
It's just this chaotic, confusing experience of trying to get needs met and then not being able to because it's too scary to.
These people that basically, I mean, you hear all the time about people who sabotage their relationships and kind of, they might get into a relationship and somebody might be giving them might be available, emotionally available, meeting their needs, and somehow they find something off or wrong. Is that similar, or am I kind of, it's not necessarily the case? I'm just trying to understand like how disorganized, like what does that look like in today's world as far as dating goes, or couples?
Mm-hmm. It would be kind of a bit bigger response than that, right? So what happens is someone who's had a lot of trauma or something is that things can get triggered in them and they can get emotionally flooded or super emotionally dysregulated. So I think what it might happen is you're dating this person, right? And they saying they want to be close to you. They're saying they want to be close to you, right? Or maybe they want to experience sexual intimacy, and then you do, and then they panic and freak out and start crying and run away, and you're like, what just happened? Yeah. Like, so I think it tends to be a little bit bigger reactions, because the stuff that's getting brought up in them is pretty distressing.
Yeah.
And it can flood. So I think as a partner, it can become confusing. You're like, I just did.
Oh, no, I don't know. There's no
to touch you, or I just reached out to do this, and you just like lost it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And secure attachment. So what does that look like? Not that I don't know.
Those weirdos that have secure attachment. Pillars of secure attachment here, aren't we? Yeah. So basically, secure attachment starts when you have a parent who is highly attuned to your needs as an infant, right? You cry because you're hungry and your parent shows up with a bottle. You cry because your diaper's dirty or you're scared, and your parent is attuned to that. And that just keeps building on itself, right? So you have an emotional experience. Your parent's like, okay, cool. I hear you. What you're asking for and what you're going through is valid, and let me offer you or reassure you or be available to you in the way that you're asking it. So it's very, it creates a very organized sense of self, right? Mm-hmm. I had this emotional experience, and then my parent is like, yeah, that makes sense. Here you go. Here's what you're needing right now. And you're like, okay, cool. So there's such a decrease, like in the other insecure ones, right? You have these emotions, these needs, and then your parent doesn't meet them. It's very confusing. Mm-hmm. So it's like, why do I must be wrong here. Like what I'm needing must be too much or not the right way to need something, or whatever it might be, however you're getting invalidated. So when you have the secure attachment, you get a lot of confidence from that, right? You trust your emotions, you ask for things that you need in relationships because you're confident and you do it in a very authentic, clear way. You don't tiptoe or say, no, I don't want you to do something for me like that. But when secretly you do want that person, no, you don't have to come to my poetry reading tonight. It's fine. I don't need you to. Really, you're hoping that person shows up. And then it's right. If you have a secure attachment, you're like, you know what? It would mean a lot to me for you to come. I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And so also when you have that, you don't have a lot of anxiety about the security of your relationships. And you're also not avoidant of intimacy. You're fine with intimacy.
Yeah.
So you create these nice relationships
Is it
And
possible to, as an individual, let's say you were given all these things as an infant and as a child, and you have a secure attachment, but somehow you found yourself dating somebody that may have like an avoidance style, or just in general be making you anxious in the particular situation. Is that something that happens, or is that usually beyond attachment theory and you're probably like dating a sociopath or something? I don't know.
so sorry, are you saying like if you have a secure attachment, can you have a relationship that makes you have an insecure
Yes.
attachment?
Yeah.
Okay. It definitely can happen. I mean, there can be pivotal relationships in your life that sort of flip things on the head, on your head. Like you may have a different come out of that feeling more anxious. You may have had an unexpected betrayal that really flipped your idea and your beliefs about others, right? So if you have a secure attachment, you have a pretty positive belief about others. Like I can reach out to another person and they're, likely can be available to meet my needs. And if they can't, I don't really need them because I have other people.
Right.
I don't have a relationship like that. And I don't believe that that's what constitutes a good relationship. But sure, I mean, you could have a relationship that you felt really secure and felt bonded to, and then there was a deep betrayal, and that could really be a bit traumatizing to your attachment system.
Yeah.
Typically, if you have a secure attachment, you don't, it tends to actually work well in the other way, where if you do have a partner with an insecure attachment, they can tend to build a more secure attachment by being with you.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's really good to know.
Yeah.
Are there specific attachment styles that are attracted to one another? Like I can imagine that the anxious is attracted to the avoidant.
Yeah. Why do you say that?
I don't know. It just seems like because that's what they, in childhood, they weren't given a consistent message. So they had, like you were saying, they had to like keep pressing that button, and eventually they would get like a little morsel of like emotion, and they would like cherish that morsel and like want more and more of it. And I imagine that the avoidant person is afraid of expressing their emotions, but they have that deep need, deep down inside they have that need, so maybe they will express it from time to time and give that anxious person a morsel here and there, so like works well together.
Totally. Yes. I will say that the vast majority of the couples I see in couples therapy are the anxious avoidant, like dynamic duo,
right?
Yeah, and it's so interesting. But yes, they're often attracted to each other. The avoidant person, someone with an avoidance style, right, will tend to be at first, right, when there isn't, right, in the beginning of a relationship, there can be like false markers of intimacy for the anxious person who tends to attach like quickly, right? And is like, oh, like, yes, and is really attached. And like to the avoidant person at the beginning of a relationship, that's a safe space. It's a low place of intimacy for them. So they can show up there. But you better believe as soon as, stuff's going to get more serious, or they're going to try to get pinned down, it's going to be a no-go, But you also do see these showing up in relationships where that definitely becomes the, negative relation cycle, where one partner's reaching out to the other one who tends, right? I mean, it can be a bit of a spectrum, right? It doesn't have to be exactly like, oh, you're so avoidant that you're like can't even be in a relationship, right? You just may have more of an avoidant tendency or more of an anxious tendency. And so when there's a tension in a relationship, you'll see that really escalate, where one partner is reaching out, and often they reach out not in like loving ways, like I need you, I want you close. It's like, you never do this, like you didn't do this, like you did it. It's criticism. Mm-hmm. And then the avoidant person, the response really shuts down.
So in those situations, obviously the goal for everyone is to have a secure attachment style.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Yeah. Because even beyond relationships, it's just good for your own mental sanity and health to be secure in your own self and not need so much from other people. Mm-hmm. But in the case where you don't have that, and you have an anxious avoidant or anxious attachment style or avoidant style, and you're finding yourself either, maybe you're single and you realize this about yourself and you want to heal it, or maybe you're in a relationship and you want to work on your relationship and figure out how to better align so that both of you are secure in it. How do you heal from these things? How do you heal from your insecure attachment style?
Yeah, I mean, I think as with most areas when you're looking to heal or change or grow, really, really like a deep, and this takes time, but a deep awareness of how this shows up in your relationships. So, you don't have to go back to your early childhood and stay there forever to think about it, but you do really need to start to think about how your needs were met as a kid, and or as a young child. And obviously we don't have explicit memory, like memory we can recall during those very early years. We definitely have implicit memory because we can feel that, right? And often, if you still have a relationship with your parent and there was an insecure attachment style, you are probably still being triggered in some way. So you can even reflect on the current one if you can't find, you can't really connect to what those experiences were as a child. And often, if you're avoidant style, you don't have a good kind of autobiographical memory of your childhood because of suppressing so much, and shutting down. Kind of the vibrancy and the experience of your early childhood just isn't accessible to your memory. So, I think starting to get a clear narrative about how your needs were or were not met by a primary caregiver. And it might be different, if you had different parents, or you might have, had the experience of having your needs met, feeling like that person was available to you. They offered reassurance and warmth and validation, maybe from a grandparent, right? So you might have that experience, and had that experience, you can tap into that. But you may look at some of these more where there may have been a more problematic parent relationship, and that you see that showing up. It's hard to do. It just depends on your level of kind of introspection. Like some people are like closer to that and they've been thinking about that for a long time. And some people really still have a very protected narrative about their parents.
Oh yeah, it's so hard to.
You don't want to crack that.
And some people just don't want to go there.
I know. Or just to shatter the image you might hold, right? Because, an unavailable parent might have been like, maybe they were so successful in their career and you've like really modeled yourself after that because you really looked up to certain things about them. And we're very, we adapt, right? And we are resilient. So we will build up these things to make us feel good about the situations we're in, especially as children, because when we're children, we can't leave. We have to stay there. As adults, we don't have to do that anymore. And that's often part of the work, when we have people like healing from trauma from their childhood and this and that, is like, you don't have, right? These things, these ways of coping, that was survival. And that was super resilient of you. Like for the anxious person or the avoidant person, or like, that was a great way that you adapted to your situation to keep yourself close to this important provider of safety, security, all these things for you. So that was really smart. It's not something you did wrong. You're not a bad person because you reacted in these ways. You did what you needed to do. Now, fast forward, you're an adult and you don't need that anymore, right? It's actually become destructive to your relationships. So now it's about unwinding that
programming,
having corrective experiences. So I think the first part, is just really starting to understand that narrative. What happens for you when you feel like you're disconnecting from this important other person? Like, do you tend to protest, get critical? Do you tend to shut down? Do you withdraw? Do you get really overwhelmed and just flooded with emotion and can't even like...
What if you do all of it?
Yeah.
I'm just asking for a friend.
Yeah.
It's just interesting. And you're right. I dated somebody who was actually super secure. Had a secure attachment style, and it made me very secure. Wow. So I'm happy that happens and that occurs. And the more secure people we have out there, the better, they can frame a relationship.
Yeah, they won't play into the cycles we can get into.
Yeah. I had a quick question about, so if you do want to take a look at your childhood and you're comfortable kind of going there, are you looking at your primary caregiver? Are you looking at both? Like, let's say you had your typical, it's not typical anymore because everything goes, and everyone comes from all sorts of different families. But let's say you had a mom and a dad, and your mom was your primary caregiver because she was home with you and dad worked. Are you looking at both of your, like what you got from both of those parents, or just your primary caregiver?
Yeah, you can definitely look at both. There seems to be, in my experience, one parent that gets you, like really gets under you the most, right? Where you notice these being triggered by their behaviors or their emotions, or you're really attuned to shifts in their emotions, right? That you are more kind of navigating them
Mm-hmm.
than another parent. However, it can be both, and you can have a different style with both parents. I just find that I think there's one, and yes, unfortunately for us mothers, it's not. It is a lot of weight. Just
Oh,
naturally, because we carry them and they feed off of our body,
yeah.
we tend to be the first primary caregiver. Now, of course, that doesn't always happen,
Mhm.
but like you're saying, often that for a lot of people, it's the mother relationship that shows up,
Mhm.
but does not have to be. And like I said, you could have a grandparent or a father or an uncle or someone,
Nanny or anyone who's giving
nanny,
that kind of care.
absolutely, who you had that other corrective experience with or not, but so it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I feel like this is super super helpful for people who want to go there. And now for people who don't, and they don't necessarily want to look backwards and just want advice as to how to be more conscious of their attachment style in a current relationship and dating and marriage, whatever. And also, um, well, I'll get to this after my question. I have like a two-part question.
Okay.
Um, but so for those people who don't want to look backwards, do you have any advice as to how they can work on their attachment style, and what are the things that they can do?
Sure. I mean, you don't have to go backwards. It does help um, in calming down kind of the parts of your. I don't want to get into like all the neuroscience and
No,
brain
get
stuff.
into neuroscience.
Like too, maybe like I think it's just we'll go down too far. But we do have like our more primal brain,
Mhm.
and that's kind of our like fight or flight, right? And then we have our frontal cortex, our executive functioning, and that came online later. But often when we get triggered around disconnecting from our attachment person, and
Mhm.
remind you that's survival, right? We have that as a source of survival, so we're not getting just triggered in our upper like analytical rational brain. We're getting triggered in this more primal survival brain, and it's like alarm bells start going off. So but we can look at our most current relationships, right? We don't have to go all the way back. It is good to consolidate why, right? It's very validating to say, oh, I understand my reaction in the context. My reaction makes sense in the context of my life or my context of my upbringing. It's a really validating way that really contains what we're going through and is less pathologizing or like something's wrong with us or something's wrong with the other person. So
Mhm.
often in the couples work, it's like, you guys, this isn't like you guys are good. You both want the same thing. You both care deeply. Unfortunately, when disconnection gets triggered, you go to this old way of survival mode, which might be to attack or it might be to shut down.
Mhm.
But that's not what you're really, right? That's just the noise.
Yeah.
The core of what you guys actually want is the same exact thing. Now, if we can just learn to, reach out to each other when we're needing this, be authentic, be more vulnerable, come to each other rather than get into these, ineffective reactions that, are not helpful in our relationships. So I feel like I got off course. What was your question?
How can
Oh,
some
the people that don't.
yeah, the people that don't necessarily want to do, and I don't want to say that, but do the work of like going down there.
Sure.
How can they, any like quick wins for somebody really looking to figure out their attachment style and how to address it?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely, there's like a host, like even in that book Attached, I like to give that book Attached also to some people who just don't have a lot of knowledge about the concept. And it gives just like a nice kind of layman's broad sweeping, information about it. And often I find for people where it might be hard to explain to them in person, just sitting down and reading this and reading stories of this, they can start to relate and be like, that sounds like me.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll often come back. And there's also like questionnaires in there. There's a couple different types of questionnaires. You can kind of go and start to get a sense like, oh, like, do I crave intimacy or do I shut down? And so one thing I'll sometimes ask people is like, what is your like protest behavior? What do you do when you feel like you're disconnecting from your partner or that your partner's moving away? Do you like attack, reach out, do anything you can do to get a response from them, or do you shut down?
Yeah.
Or do you just like freeze?
Okay, that's super helpful. And there's like, I'm sure there's like an online quiz somebody can take as far as like what
It's like adult attachment questionnaire. There's a couple. There's some in that Attached book too. He references one. If you want to attach one, I can send one to you.
Okay. My other question is, so primary caregivers, moms, there's a lot of pressure on primary caregivers and moms on all of this, given that so much is determined when the baby is 0 to, like they say, 0 to 7 years old. So you're wanting to do all the right things, and it's a lot of pressure. Do you have any advice on how to balance all that? Because like we're all only human.
I know. It's so hard. It's a lot of pressure. I would encourage you, if you haven't had kids yet, I mean, or even if you have them, but like, I guess you have a head start if you don't have kids and some of this stuff is resonating with you, to seek out, therapy or, a therapist with some, most interventions have some focus or some basis in attachment theory, but you can definitely find therapists who are really focused on this idea of attachment and understanding that. And therapy is actually one really significant way that you can have develop a secure attachment and have one of these new corrective experiences of what it feels like to connect to somebody and for them to offer, for you to reach out and for them to be able to offer you what you're needing and for them to be highly attuned to you. So therapy is one way, secure partner is another way. I will say again, not to be redundant, but if you do have kids or you are planning to have kids, again, that kind of that narrative of what your childhood was and how your needs weren't met is helpful.
Yeah.
And how you get triggered and just kind of having that, and it's like you don't necessarily have to do so much with it, but having that understanding so that and being educated on attachment, honestly.
Yeah.
So you can kind of notice when those things are coming up, but you're not going to be perfect.
Totally. Yeah, but having a good understanding, at least the awareness is so huge. Yeah. Real quick question. So let's say there's a couples therapy. If you're in a relationship, what's the best way to bring up going to couples therapy? I feel like, both people have to be open to therapy. And sometimes one may be more open than the other, and people may view it as a negative, like, oh, we're going to therapy, we don't have problems. I don't understand why you would want to go to couples therapy. But I think therapy has been so helpful for me personally. I've never been to couples therapy, but I can see how incredibly helpful it could be, even if you have the most perfect relationship and you're so in love. And there's always room for checking in with one another and doing it in a way that's productive. So how do you get your partner to go to couples therapy, if you have any advice on that, if they're like reluctant? Obviously you can't force somebody to do anything, but how do you frame it in a way that makes it a little bit more palatable?
Yeah. I mean, I think anytime you want to kind of like empower somebody to do. I think it's focusing less on like the weaknesses, but also more on like the strengths. Like you're saying, like, what can we get? Because yeah, like even though we might be great, like what could we learn about each other? How could we strengthen this, and not making it so, I mean, I think too often what happens is one partner thinks they're bringing the other partner in because that partner has all the issues. And if they can just get like a professional to like validate that that partner has all the issues, then like things could get better. Or they think their partner needs therapy, but they know they won't go on their own. So like they think they're more open to going to couples therapy. That feels a little less intimidating for the partner who's not as open to going. So they'll start with couples therapy. There's always work to do on both sides, because of these rich histories we all have, right? So we grew up in different households. We grew up maybe with different values. I mean, different cultures, right? We grew up getting our needs met in different ways, and having different models of what that looks like. We can't just expect to show up and for it to just like work perfectly. And we never need to like work on it or grow. And then we have these transitions where we bring like other human beings who are so needy and they suck all the energy out of the house. And so I don't have a perfect way to get people to therapy, but as much as you can, focusing on it as like this positive, enhancing, like a lot of the couples, once they do come in, and if they're very busy and pulled in a lot of directions out in other areas of their life, like even once they've gotten to a better place, they'll just keep the hour because it's like, oh my gosh, it's like this 1 hour a week. We just get to come in. It's just about the two of us.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to find that in your busy life with the demands of work or kids or whatever it might be. And so I will say, just as like a plug out there, that typically there's one partner that doesn't want to be there. And I've so many times just seen like how they open up and how they like really start to appreciate the process once they're in. It's like always just like heartwarming and nice to see, because you're like, oh, this person really doesn't want to be here. They like don't even want to talk for a while, and then you'll start to see them and they're like jumping right into session, like and they really find it to be like a helpful space. So
that's good. That's good to know because it's super intimidating. So do couples usually come in with like a particular topic that they want to cover that session, or how does it usually go? Do you have to like have talking points? Do you have to prepare for therapy? Just for those people that haven't done it, and just so they get an idea so that it's not so intimidating.
You know what? Either or. Come as you are, right? Some people come in, they're really specific. I also do a lot of sex therapy. So that can usually, might be more typical, right? We're not having sex, or someone's having pain during sex, or someone's having erectile difficulties. That might seem very specific, but it always ends up broadening out anyways to relationship things and everything. So, I mean, come as you are. Some people don't know where to start. That's okay. I mean, it's an unfolding process. Some people just know something's off and they don't exactly know what to do or how to get there. They're just struggling, and that's fine. Like that's kind of what we're here for, is to help you get clarity and to start to navigate, where you are and where you're trying to get to and what the barriers are that's keeping you from being in this space.
Totally.
Whatever that goal might be.
Speaking of sex therapy, does attachment theory or your attachment style bleed into that at all, or are they kind of separate?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think it's an emotional process, right? And sex and intimacy are one way that we seek, that we bond. So, just as there's obviously a million other iterations of examples, but one example maybe of an anxious attachment style is maybe sex becomes a way that you get your partner closer, right? It's kind of a means to keep them close. So you might be more willing or just trying to use that as a way for them to stay with you rather than just as a way for you guys to feel connected or whatever, right? Same thing, still a positive thing in the relationship, but the motive behind it and the reason there is not as healthy as just kind of sharing from a mutually pleasurable experience, to bond.
Got it. Okay. We'll have to do another podcast about sex specifically, maybe. I feel like it's an interesting topic that everyone is so, I feel like everyone's so interested in it, but it's also really not a conversation people have like at a dinner table. So maybe a podcast is a nice way to break the ice and talk about.
Maybe you don't have it at a dinner table, but you
Oh
can
yeah, no, people do. Definitely. But yeah, maybe it's a little bit less talked about.
for
Okay.
sure.
This has been so helpful. So where can people find you in case they want to read more about attachment theory or book an appointment with you?
Sure. They can find me at Dr. just Dr. Jessica Waldron, WALDRON.com.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.